Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club, a show where our guests, a Canadian writer and activist and a legal scholar from Australia, will discuss with a German host, yours truly, what is wrong with America, especially the internet, because that was, of course, created over there. Okay, bad humor at 5 p.m. Second Life time and 2 in the morning German time. Today's guests are Cory Doctorow and Rebecca Giblin, and the word shit will be used today in a metaphorical sense, probably throughout the hour. Let me start by introducing you to their fabulous book, Chokepoint Capitalism, How Big Tech and Big Content Captured Creative Labor Markets and How We'll Win Them Back. This is towards the end of the book, and what is amazing about that book, we're going to get into detail throughout the hour, is that it lists problems, but it also provides a lot of really, really great ideas for solutions. This is a little excerpt that I want to start the show with. Knowledge and culture are vital to human thriving. Art gives expression to new ideas and movements. Making and experiencing it can be an act of solidarity or protest. Music, poetry, fiction, memoir, sculpture, painting, and dance are all necessary to making sense of and bearing being human. I really like that the book is about the creative field or creative labor and what's happening in that field through monopolies, monopsonies, all sorts of legal shenanigans and other things that we'll discuss, is also applicable to other types of labor. And we'll ask Cory and Rebecca why they focus on the creative field, because very often we are canaries in the coal mine. But let me say hello to our guests first, Rebecca Giblin from Australia, and she is the director of the Intellectual Property Research Institute of Australia, and Cory Doctorow, sci-fi writer, activist, and veteran of the Second Life Book Club, as a matter of fact. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Drax.
Hi.
Here's Cory. Wonderful to have you in the last corner of the internet that is not enshittified, or maybe it is. We'll find that out. But let's get to the terms first. How would you define this term that you're using in the book, and also Cory, you do that in your tweet threads, enshittification. I put it here up on the board. Maybe Rebecca first, because Cory is using it. Rebecca, how do you define enshittification in the context of what we're talking about?
Well, I think it's I will mostly let Cory explain this, because this is a coin that this is a term that he coined. But I did think that it was a natural progression of what we talked about when we first came up with this idea of chokepoint capitalism, which is this idea that say what you like about capitalism, but it is supposed to rely on free markets, free exchange between buyers and sellers and competition. And what we saw when we started having a look at what was happening to creative labor markets, we saw that there was this systematic project to eliminate competition, so that there was no free exchange between buyers and sellers. We saw that these big corporations all throughout our creative markets, from YouTube to Amazon to Audible, the Hollywood screenwriters, big three record labels who own the big three music publishers, they were all setting out to systematically create these choke points that would eliminate competition and allow them to secure more than a fair share of value. And then let me throw over to you, Cory, because enshittification came soon after that. And I think you just pulled a couple more threads together of the playbook that's being used.
And we're going to get into the detail of,
Sure.
of books and music and all that. So enshittification, Cory, what is this?
Yeah, sure. I think that our book really focuses on the way that the internet started off as a force for disintermediation, where we took away all the middlemen that sat between communities and each other, creators and audiences, buyers and sellers, movements and the people they care about, and then we re-intermediated them all. You know, we now have platforms as the dominant life form on the internet. These two-sided markets with business customers on one side and end users on the other, and under conditions where there's very little competition, which describes the internet today, because the internet has dwindled to what Tom Eastman calls 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. These companies are able to capture their regulators, and they're able to pursue a kind of self-destructive, auto-cannibalistic way of being that first destroys all the communities and value that rely on them and that they create, and then destroys themselves. And in the enshittification process, first you have benefits given to end users. So think of Facebook giving you just free access to all the people that you cared about, just showing you what they had to say in reverse chronological order. And then once those users are locked in, and with social media, people just lock themselves in. You know, once all your friends are there, it's very hard for you to leave, and it's very hard for them to leave because you're there. Then that value can be withdrawn and given to business customers like publishers or performers or advertisers. And so we had Facebook turn around to the advertisers saying and tell them, hey, do you remember when we opened up Facebook to the general public in 2006, we said, stop using MySpace. It's owned by an evil Australian billionaire, and he spies on you all the time. Come and use Facebook. We'll never spy on you. And they said, well, that was just a lie. We're going to spy on you all day long, and we're going to sell your data to advertisers, which they did. Same with publishers. You know, they said, well, when these people came over from MySpace, we promised them we were just going to show them the things they asked to see, the things posted by the people they chose to follow. But now that they're all locked in, we're going to start, you know, cramming stuff into their eyeballs that they never asked to see. And that can be your stuff if you post little excerpts. And so with the users locked in because they value each other, and with the advertisers and publishers locked in because they value the users, Facebook can enter the third stage of enshittification, where they take away value from those publishers and from those advertisers. So the advertising gets more expensive and less reliable. Publishers have a harder time reaching their audience and eventually have to post their entire content rather than just an excerpt that might lead someone to their own website where they can monetize them the way that they feel like. And where they might even have to pay to boost their content just to reach their own followers. And all the surplus value is extracted until all that's left is the residue needed to keep everyone locked in. And, you know, that's such a brittle equilibrium. It's so easy for that to shatter for, you know, a live stream mass shooting or a whistleblower or a privacy scandal, to have people go, you know, I used to think I couldn't leave this place even though I hated it, and now I realize that there's nothing keeping me here. I'm out. And when that happens, the platforms panic, and the technical term for panicking is pivoting. And the pivot that Facebook has undergone is to reinvent itself as a place where legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon characters will live out the rest of their days in a virtual world he ripped off from a 25-year-old cyberpunk novel.
And I thought those are really cool avatars they have over there. Now, Cory, if I understand you correctly, just one quick follow-up. First of all, it's amazing how you just summarized this entire book. Now people won't buy it anymore, but people should, because like I said, it also provides solutions that we're going to get into at the second half of the hour. But did I understand you correctly just now where you said that it will destroy companies? Now, why would companies destroy themselves? What do they get out of that?
They just can't help it. I think that when a company gets big enough, for one thing, the executives within that company start to see each other as their primary competitors. I mean, think about YouTube, or Google rather. Google is a company that is not going to grow by attracting more people to use its search engine. When you have 90% of the search market, and when you have to click like 11 different buttons to switch search engines, then everyone who's not a Google user has chosen not to be a Google user and is never coming back. And so all the growth in that company is going to come from finding ways to squeeze either users or publishers. And so you have all these different executives at YouTube, at Google, who are locked in a race to see who can eat their seed corn the fastest. and they're all competing with each other. And so they just end up doing these very destructive things. And you see that in the monotonic degradation of the quality of all of these services.
Yeah, no, I mean
Google,
from a user standpoint, from a customer standpoint, this stuff sucks, and the monoculture is is offensive to me. The incentivizing shit, or how YouTube's algorithm incentivizes basically to produce crap that then results in an endless stream of monocultural boring crap. But I wonder who benefits, and maybe bringing in Rebecca, but somebody's got to benefit from this stuff. I mean, as dumb as some captains of industry are, I'm not naming any names. Some of them, but one thing that they still want to do is make a lot of money.
Well, that's the thing that they're really good at, right? They are making a lot of money because they have managed to successfully lock in consumers and then lock in suppliers, and then put themselves in a position where they can make that take that extra cut. What we get told when people complain about this and say that companies shouldn't have so much power, one of the big responses from these companies is that, but they need to make all of this money because that's what is going to fuel more innovation. What we see, though, is that these companies are actually incredibly bad at creating innovative new products. But when a new company comes along and does actually start doing something cool, they buy that up and they bring it into the same house where the same stultification happens. So it's got to a point where so much of this is making money for the sake of making more money, and then using that money to stop anyone else from making us nice things.
Okay, so they're making money because they're essentially monopolies are the problem. And incidentally, we're sitting on a huge monopoly board. If the camera can zoom out a little bit, I want to give a shout out to David Dayan, who was here with Cory last time. He also wrote a book that I think is a must-read. It's called Monopolized, kind of some overlapping themes. So monopolies are the problem. And then is the solution then is antitrust. What is antitrust, and is antitrust the solution?
Could I jump in there, Drax, just before we go in and talk more about that? Everyone knows what a monopoly is, but everyone should know what a monopsony is. And this is a really, really important word that so many people haven't heard. We had it in a bunch more times in the early draft of this book, and everybody begged us to take it out because it's just not a word that people really find pleasant.
Book on the slide board, folks. Go ahead.
And so let me just tell everyone what a monopsony is, because this will help people see the problems of the world in a little bit of a different way. So a monopoly, we know about this one because there's a family destroying board game that teaches us the rules, and that's where you've got a seller that's got a lot of power, and that sets the terms that the buyers have to buy. And monopsony is the inverse of that. That's where you've got a really powerful buyer, and they decide the terms that the sellers have to comply with. And so Amazon, for example, in its interactions with book publishers and so many other sellers of consumer goods, is a monopsonist. And then you've got a similar sort of situation. I think in lots of countries, this is not just in creative labor markets that we find monopsonies endemic. In Australia here with the supermarkets, we've got two big supermarket chains. They are the places where all of the farmers and food manufacturers need to sell their food into, because there's so little by way of alternative distribution mechanisms. The thing with monopsonies is that they arise at much lower market concentrations than you need for monopoly. And so, if you've got a market that only has maybe 5 or 6 significant buyers, that's already very, very difficult for the sellers to sell into. And so, understanding that buyers having too much power is at least as problematic as sellers having too much power is the first thing to understand. But then also the fact that what we've seen is over the last 40 or so years, this interpretation of antitrust law that had a very narrow idea of what is problematic in terms of antitrust or competition failure as being about, where has it adversely affected consumer welfare? And then consumer welfare has been interpreted really narrowly as well to, and this does lack nuance, but the shorthand is to say, well, where it raises consumer prices. So if you tell a company that the only thing that they're going to get in trouble for is if they raise consumer prices, what you're begging them to do is to become powerful enough that they can squeeze their suppliers and their workers. And when you squeeze your suppliers and workers, that doesn't necessarily put consumer prices up, or at least it doesn't do so in a way that can be tied to that. But it means that there's downward pressure on people's incomes. And so it has the same end result for people living in the society, which is that we've got less and less ability to pay for the goods and services that we need.
I put up this graphic that you have in the book, the anti-competitive flywheel. It's on the board right now. Maybe Cory, you can expand on that. I mean, Amazon is one example that you use in the book, how they brought people in, especially also self-published authors. We have a lot of self-published authors here in this community, and they always go, I got to go to Amazon, I got to do this, and they give me a good deal. And they did give people good deals in the beginning, and but now we're at a different place. So, Cory, could you explain a little bit this anti-competitive flywheel concept?
Sure. Well, Amazon likes to tout a flywheel that creates value for their investors. And they say, well, we bring in users with low prices, and that tempts in suppliers. And those suppliers have this scale, and they can reach so many customers that they lower their prices, which brings in more customers. And then those customers bring in more sellers. And it's a flywheel that goes faster and faster and faster until one day, basically, you control all the commerce. And this was the basis on which Amazon was able to bring in so much investment capital, and that allowed it to sell goods below cost and lose a lot of money for a really long time in order to complete this loop. But, there's another way of thinking about this flywheel, which is that you lock in the users. So you do that maybe with chains of iron. So you think about digital rights management that bind the books and audiobooks that you buy on Amazon to their platform forever. You can't release them under the laws of most of the world. It's actually against the law to release a tool to remove digital rights management, even if you're not infringing copyright. And the penalties for releasing that tool, they're crazy. In the US, it's a $500,000 fine and a 5-year prison sentence for a first offense. Which means that if I, as the author of a book who writes that book, prepares the Kindle edition, and sells it to you through Amazon, if I give you a tool to remove the DRM from that book, I commit a felony, and I can go to prison for 5 years. It's probably a smaller prison sentence than you would face. Well, it's definitely smaller than you would face if you just went into a bookstore and shoplifted the print edition. It's probably smaller than if you stuck a gun in the face of someone leaving a warehouse with a truck full of books and stole the whole truck. So it is more illegal for the author to let the reader take their books with them if Amazon doesn't approve of it than it is to just steal the books. And so you have that kind of lock-in, which is the chains of iron. But you also have kind of a silken ribbon that binds people to it. So Amazon loves subscription services. They'll let you subscribe to shipping by paying for it a year in advance, or once you've bought a year's worth of shipping in advance, you'd be crazy to shop elsewhere. So Prime households start and end their searches on Prime, and once they're there, they just buy whatever's at the top of the list. Generally speaking, with Audible and with the Kindle programs, they want you to buy subscriptions where you get a book a month or a couple of books a month. And those subscriptions, again, you'd have to be crazy if you've already paid for an audiobook on Audible to go shop anywhere else. So you get both of these things. You get lock-in through these coercive measures and these kind of seductive measures. But once those users are locked in, then the suppliers have to be there. And Amazon can squeeze those suppliers. And if you've been paying any attention at all to the Federal Trade Commission's case against those suppliers, you know that Amazon is taking 45 to 51 cents out of every dollar that they make. And they use a most favored nation deal to require those suppliers to keep their price on Amazon as the lowest price they offer anywhere. And so if they raise their price to make up for that 50% that Amazon is taking out of their hides on Amazon, they have to raise their price everywhere else. So goods everywhere become more expensive. Amazon Prime makes so much money from shippers who feel that they have to use Prime or they won't be surfaced in search results, that Amazon's own shipping costs them nothing. They have enough profit just from Prime that Amazon doesn't pay a dime to ship their own goods. And when you consider that many of those goods are copies of the goods their own sellers make, you have to realize then that as a seller, you're paying Amazon 51 cents on the dollar out of every good you sell, and Amazon is using that to ship their own goods for free. And so this is a double whammy that breaks those suppliers.
This is interesting, Cory, because I was always under the impression we live in a free market society, and now you're telling me the best product does not float to the top. It's actually the algorithm that is bringing this to the top. Also, I learned from your book, and actually I laughed out loud when I read this sentence. If you learned your economics from Heinlein novels or the University of Chicago, you probably think that free market describes an economic system that is free from government interference. So who came up with that sentence? Rebecca, you or him?
I think that sounds like a Cory one.
I think that's probably me, yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, Adam Smith said that what makes a market free is if it's free from rents. That is, if what economists call the factors of production are things that capitalists can get without having to pay someone who owns them but doesn't use them in business in order to do their stuff. I mean, one way to think about the difference between profits and rents is to imagine a coffee shop. So the coffee shop has a landlord, that's the rentier, and he makes his money from rents. And it has an entrepreneur or capitalist who makes their money from capital, right? And from separating workers from the surplus their labor generates. So the capitalist invests in espresso machines and tables and refrigerators for the oat milk and so on. Now imagine a much nicer cafe opens across the street and puts that cafe out of business. Well, the capitalist loses, but the rentier, the landlord, wins, because the landlord now has a factor of production, a property that they can rent out to someone who wants to move into the neighborhood because it's got that hot new coffee shop in it. And so rents are not subject to competition, but profits are. And, you know, Steinbeck supposedly once said that Americans never embrace socialism because American workers see themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's definitely true that American capitalists, by and large, see themselves as temporarily embarrassed feudalists, people who would rather own things for a living and not have to compete than people who have to do the hard work of competing. I mean, no one hates capitalism as much as capitalists.
And this is interesting, and thank you. This is a perfect segue, because I wanted to ask this also to Rebecca. I told her when we did the sound check. Yanis Varoufakis, former Greek finance minister and activist, founder of DM25, he wrote a book called Techno-Feudalism, and I saw a few interviews, I haven't read the book yet, where he says we don't live in capitalism anymore. This is now feudalism, exactly because of this rentier aspect that you just mentioned. He basically says there are no markets anymore because Jeff Bezos sits there, and there's no market there. He determines what gets made and what gets sold. So Rebecca, I'm going to throw this to you. What is it? Capitalism? Is it feudalism? Does it matter?
Well, look, I don't think it's capitalism anymore in an increasing number of spheres. And we talk about this as well. We talk about the notion of feudal lords when we're talking about the walled gardens that we've ended up in, when these powerful corporations do use things like digital rights management to pen us all in. And there's a section where we get a little bit graphic with the allegory. When you're told by Apple, for example, that you're not allowed to jailbreak your iPhone, to protect you from all of those monsters at the gate. But then at some point you realize that you are penned in, and once you're penned in, and anything can be done to you in that sort of captive position. And it might be that at the moment it's in the interest of Apple and maximizing shareholder value to emphasize privacy, and it certainly does so in a way that some other companies don't. But the moment that changes, the moment that the calculus says that selling our data will be worth more than promising to keep it away from at least certain people, even though Apple does, of course, continue to spy on us, then we're sitting ducks and we don't have the power to change that. So I very much agree that there's these feudal aspects that have come in throughout these different industries, and that I think really Cory's work in developing enshittification and talking about the ways out of that, the importance of having things like rights to exit, a great way of protecting ourselves and providing the kinds of checks and balances that will keep these corporations in line.
There's so many terms. There's also chickenization, but in the interest of time, I just threw it up here on the board. Chickenization, wonderful term as well. In the interest of time, let's not define it. You guys got to get the book. The book is Chokepoint Capitalism by our guests, Rebecca Giblin and Cory Doctorow. Now, what I gleaned from the book is that apparently better internet filters, more stringent copyright, are maybe not so good for the creatives, for people like me who is making videos and putting them on YouTube. But I was told that internet filters are good, and I was told that stringent copyright is good, and I was also told by the EU that the GDPR legislation is also good. This is a huge question. Why is that stuff not good and sufficient? Why does it actually cement the current power structure if we just focus on these things?
Well, I think that you're getting at. Before I answer that, I just want to say a word about the structure of the book here and why we structured it the way we did. So, when industry dwindles down to just a few companies, they tend to invent these bizarre accounting tricks to steal from their suppliers. The term of art from the finance sector is MIGO, which stands for My Eyes Glaze Over. And these are just these very kind of involved and intricate scams. And we spend the first half of the book unwinding how these scams work. And we spend the second half of the book explaining what we should do about it, proposing shovel-ready solutions for actually shifting the distribution from capital to labor so that workers who make the creative products get more money at the expense of their bosses who finance the creative products or create the choke points that the creative products have to go through. And that's really the only thing that matters here. For a long time, economists have told us that we shouldn't really focus on what size the slice of the pie you're getting, just focus on making the pie bigger. And sure, maybe if your share of the pie is about half and it bounces around a little between 49 and 51% as the pie grows, that makes a lot of sense. But if as the pie grows and grows, your share dwindles to like a little homeopathic dose, then paying attention to how the pie is divided up starts to make a lot of sense. And so all of the stuff we talk about in the second half of the book is about how to get a larger slice of the pie for workers.
And Cory, sorry to interrupt, and we're going to get exactly there in 1 minute. But I apologize for this very broad question. Let's bring it down to this general data protection regulation, where I was told, not me, a lot of people were told, this is how we're going to go after these huge companies, mostly American-based or owned. And this will solve the problem. Can you explain what this general data protection regulation, how bad it is for small players that actually want to get into the game?
Well, not the general data protection regulation, but rather the copyright the copyright filter rule in the Digital Single Markets Directive, what was called Article 13 and is now Article 17. We're getting into some heavy-duty bureaucratic weeds here. But in 2019, the European Union adopted a rule requiring large platforms, or platforms rather, to somehow keep things that infringe copyright that might be posted by users from showing up on the internet. And the rapporteur, the guy who was in charge of this, a German MEP called Axel Voss, he said all along, well, it's not really a rule that says you have to make copyright filters like Content ID. There might be lots of other ways to do it. But as soon as the rule passed by 5 votes, And then afterwards, 10 MEPs said they got confused and pressed the wrong button, but it was too late. As soon as the rule passed, Axel Voss said, no, absolutely, this is going to require copyright filters. And these copyright filters are incredibly expensive. The Content ID, which is a kind of toy version of the filters contemplated by the rule in the Digital Single Markets Directive, cost $100 million to stand up and maintain. And it's really just a fraction of what you're going to need in order to comply. And so what that does,
so basically, to simplify
which,
the legislation requires companies that they become liable for when somebody uploads like whatever, like a TV show or some song that is copyrighted, right?
Well, sure, or some text or some audio or a still image, yeah. And if you make the cost of entering the market $100 million to build one of these filters or significantly more, then you basically ensure that only Facebook and Google and maybe TikTok are ever going to be hosting user content, which means that they will have less competition and it'll be easier for them to squeeze the creators that rely on those platforms.
Gotcha. That's exactly what I wanted to for folks to understand, because I think people think that the content ID thing, for example, on YouTube, is wonderful, but there are huge problems with it as well. And now that I'm looking at the clock, we got to get to the solutions. But before we get to the solutions, what I also learned is that streaming services versus major labels. Who is the baddie? Who is worse? We live in a binary society, so there can only be one baddie and one goodie. And I always thought the streaming services are really bad. Also, actually, what I also learned is that playlists are really bad, and there's only chill playlists. Again, a huge question. Rebecca, streaming services versus the major labels.
You know that I'm always going to reject. I'm always going to reject a false dichotomy, Drax.
Yes.
I think like one of the things you asked about in the previous question, I think helps us answer this too. You said, stringent copyright protection is not the answer, and what I want to say here is that we have to dig into stringent for who. Right. So what we've got is we've developed this copyright system over many, many years that gives the copyright owners a lot of rights, but copyright creators very few. Okay. And we analogize that in the book to, giving in those circumstances where you've got few protections for individual creators, and then you put them up to bargain with wildly powerful companies, just giving more copyright to those creators is like giving your bullied kid more lunch money. If the bullies are shaking them down at the school gate for their lunch money every day, giving them more lunch money is not actually going to help. It doesn't matter how much money you give them. What it probably will do is get the school bullies to use some of the money that they steal to create a worldwide campaign saying, won't somebody give the hungry school children more lunch money? But it's not actually going to get them fed. And so when we talk about when we talk about the kinds of interventions we need in copyright, but also when we talk about who are the goodies and who are the baddies, it's all about evening up the playing field so that you don't have these power imbalances. We want to make sure that everybody is able to get, a fair share. And so what we see with the record labels, they determined the terms on which the streaming industry could get started because they had the right to decide how the copyrights were going to be used, because they took those rights for the entire term of the copyright, which in the case of sound recordings can be close to a century in some countries. They don't have an obligation to use those rights in a way that facilitates the interests of the recording artists who have made those recordings. They do so in a way that's going to benefit the executives and it's going to benefit the C-suite as well. They're going to benefit the shareholders as well. And then you've got the streaming companies who agree to enter into the market on those terms that are set to benefit the major labels. And then as they get more power, they start trying to find ways to swing these markets so that the power shifts more towards them, because it's not sustainable for them to be paying out as much as they are in royalties at the moment. And so when they do things like hire fake artists to pretend to be real artists and provide all of this ambient, lo-fi ambient music that then Spotify puts onto playlists.
Yeah, I didn't know. I just put this
is,
out there, the Chill Vibes playlist, and in the book it's like all chill this, chill that. Oh, gets you going through the workday, and apparently these are all basically quote unquote fake artists in the sense that they, I mean, if you're like an ambient guy and you go like, hey, I'm gonna get on these playlists and I'm gonna make a living. No way. They have their own people that they have special deals with that make that music for these playlists primarily, no?
That will do it much more cheaply. So if you're Brian Eno or some other kind of really reputable ambient playlist, very ambient artist, you've got much less chance now of getting onto these playlists. And then and this is why it's really dangerous to, Spotify is seducing us all the time, encouraging us to listen to the music that their algorithm comes up with just for you, so the Discover Weekly and so on. It can be really seductive, and sometimes it is a cool place to find new music. But when you outsource to Spotify the decision about what goes into your ears, they don't use that power to just put what they think you're going to like the most. They use that, and that's the enshittification cycle, to first of all give you the music that they think you're going to like most, and then slowly degrade that and give you the music that they can pay the least for. And that's exactly what's happening where you've got Spotify offer these new programs to artists and say, hey, you know how you earn hardly anything from streaming, but how you really, really want to be the one who will break through to be the next big thing so that you've got a chance at actually being able to feed your family. Well, what if you accepted half the royalty of the almost nothing, so that's still almost nothing, but then you've got a higher chance of being playlisted? That's exactly the kind of thing that they're doing. And so that there's no goodie or there's no baddie. It's just you've got these self-interested companies who are operating within the neoliberal economic structures that we have entrenched over the last decades, and they're all obviously doing things in their self-interest that maximize the money that go to the executives, the money that goes to the shareholders, and screw the artists, screw the listeners. That's not important.
Screw them. And I have here to share my BMG statement, and I'm certainly not a big artist. I'm not even touring, but I do have about 200 titles registered. And here's my royalty statement. For the period of 6 months, I made €4.76. Absolutely amazing. So kids, don't quit your day job. We have a special guest in the audience, Philip Linden, also known as Philip Rosedale, and he was, before he started Second Life, I believe he was with Real Media, and I learned from your book that Real Media was, and I did not notice, actually had the ability or provided the ability to play stuff from other places on the iPod. And so they basically circumvented the DRM. I grabbed this website from 2000. This is the real.com from 2000, courtesy of the Wayback Machine. I don't know if Philip remembers that, or if one of our guests wants to talk about that sort of first sort of way to open a walled garden, and then I think that was shut down by a lawsuit.
Hey, hi, Draxtor.
Well, I'd happily defer to Philip on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I should first say that I started Second Life in 1999, the company. So that particular fight, I think, happened maybe just after I left. But we did, Rob, our CEO, was very passionate about, the company was originally called Progressive Networks. Rob was very interested in, sort of being a broadcaster himself. And, so we then, because we had to build a lot of technology to send audio and video over what was then a, mostly dial-up internet, we focused on a lot of technology, and that was my background. I was the CTO and, worked on all the tech. But yeah, we got into a lot of really interesting disputes, and Rob did love taking on the big guys whenever he got a chance, and some of it was probably self-interested relative to the company, but he was passionate about these issues as well, and it is complicated. And to what Cory said earlier, that this idea that these companies use things like DRM to provide lock-in just does seem utterly wrong. And I know we were, maybe that was an example of where we were trying to just push on that a little bit as a company.
And what's funny, Phil, we talked before we went live that SL was always, or I perceived it as always, being accused of being a walled garden, while everybody else was building their super fortified gardens. And in sort of in the mainstream media, it was like, oh yeah, everybody's working on open stuff, but these Second Life people, they're totally walled. Weird, huh? I don't know.
Well, I do think it's appropriate. I mean, these concerns around, to what degree there is central control, and just as we're hearing from Cory and Rebecca, that there are terrible and subtle dangers, to allowing these, middle people to exist. And so I think it's appropriate that people would hit us with that concern. But as we said just before the show started, I think in the case of Second Life, there was a different sort of a playing field, which was driven more by the fact that people could create anything they wanted in a very detailed way in the content, and that actually sort of kept us as a company, and I think this was a good thing, from being able to make a lot of the sort of changes or twiddling, as Cory calls it, that would have slowly caused us to cause harm to our customers, which, by the way, I mean, I think this book is fantastic, and I think that there are many, many possible histories in which we would have done exactly the same thing. And as we brought up in the beginning, I'm kind of delighted and mystified. I think it's a fair question as to why we sort of didn't end up doing that, or being tempted to do it.
The enshittifiers were knocking at the door, but you didn't let them in.
Well, I think Philip raises a really good point here, which is that it's not merely that there are moral failings in the leadership of these companies. It's that they do not face discipline for yielding to temptation, right? If there is real competition, if users can leave, if suppliers can go elsewhere, if you fear regulators coming after you for doing bad things, if the platform is open enough that users can modify it to protect themselves with things like ad blockers, then when there's the temptation to do something bad, either because your investors are leaning on you, or because you're running out of money and you want to make sure that you don't have to make all the people who came and worked with you homeless, and so you feel like you're doing the right thing by making these compromises. If you face this discipline, then certain things are taken off the table. And what I think has really changed over the last couple of decades is how much stuff that used to be off limits has become common now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have 15 minutes left, so we got to get to the solution. And what I gleaned from the book is that there's basically two things, and one very important thing is that I'm as a far lefty is very excited about is collective action, and we do see it all around us in the US more than in my home country of Germany, interestingly enough. And the Germans, they like to sort of complain about Americans all the time, but in terms of labor action, there's a lot going on. There's the writer's strike, and I think we have some breaking news that just broke before we went to air, but with the writer's strike.
It looks like they've
yeah?
settled. It's that they're going to put a settlement to the membership, and it looks like the studio's caved.
That's
So
the
good-
actor's strike, though, not the writer's strike, right?
Actor strike.
Yeah.
The writer's strike
Because-
settled already. Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
the writers settled, and then the actors came in. So huge amounts of people in solidarity with each other out there. This slide here is from John Deere, from the UAW strike at the John Deere factory. Then there's a bunch of Amazon strikes, and I all around the world actually. Here is one from the UK with this sign that says "We are not robots." And so collective action is important. Cory and Rebecca, that should go without saying. But I feel just a brief answer to that. Do you feel that there is a renewed sort of class consciousness in the broader public, that we're in fact not all in one boat, or we're one big family, that there are huge different interests? Because I always remember talking to my wife's grandmother and her folks playing cards. and they were, they were in their 70s, and the one guy was a nice guy. He was so anti-union, it was bizarre to me, coming from Germany and moving to the US and talking to that guy. And he said, oh yeah, they're all just, the unions are just all out for themselves. And he bought this whole anti-union propaganda. And I never knew the history of the dismantling of the labor movement in the US, and it was baffling. But anyway, it seems to be coming back, which is a good thing. Is this huge, or is this not enough?
Well, I think that we're definitely at an inflection point with organized labor where there's more support for labor than we've seen in living memories, at least since I was a kid. There's been not just a halt to the declining support for organized labor, but an absolute reversal, with vast supermajorities of Americans from all backgrounds supporting labor unions, including self-identified conservatives increasingly supporting labor unions. So that's a big part of it. We have about a half dozen different ways of solving things, and some are very broad, like join a union. Some are very specific, like if you earn royalties from your work and you audit your royalty statement, which you're typically allowed to do, you will often find errors in those royalty statements, and those errors are, for reasons I cannot hope to speculate on, almost always in favor of the label and not in favor of the musician. If this is a music royalty statement, we cite a company here in LA that's done tens of thousands of these over decades, and every single time they found a discrepancy, except once. That
There's a matter of fact also a black
label.
box where hundreds of millions of dollars are in that black box, where people don't know
Indeed.
who owns that money. Well, yeah.
That's right. So if you find this and you say, you've stolen my money and I'd like you to give it to me, the label will say, well, you can't afford to sue us, but since we're such nice guys, we don't think that we owe you anything. We think you're bad at math, but we'll give you half of what you think we owe you. You just have to sign a non-disclosure and promise not to tell anyone else we're stealing money from, how we're stealing it, and where we hide it. And so this can be fixed quite readily because contract is a matter of state law. Almost all of these contracts related to the entertainment industry are settled in one of 4 states. You have New York and California, then you have Washington State because of the video games companies and Amazon, and the country music industry in Nashville, Tennessee. Amending state law is much easier than changing federal law regulation. Just changing the law to say, in one or more of those states, to say, as a matter of public policy, non-disclosure cannot be enforced when it pertains to material omissions or misstatements in royalty statements. That would put more money in the pockets of more artists all over the world than 40 years of copyright term extension combined. And that's what I mean when I say we are focused on proposals that make money for artists, not proposals that let artists feel angry because their audience listens to their music the wrong way, but proposals that let them put braces on their kids' teeth, a roof over their head, and groceries on their table.
And you have this thing here, also another term that is used in the solution section, ComCom. What does ComCom stand for?
Yeah, this is competitive compatibility or adversarial interoperability. This is the idea that you should be able to do what Phil's old company did all those years ago and reverse engineer existing services to allow audiences and creative workers to escape them. So, for example, to make alternative players for Audible books that allow people to break up with Amazon, throw away their apps, and move their collection over to a new service. This would have all kinds of positive effects for lots of different kinds of people. For example, the prohibition on reverse engineering is a huge impediment to the right to repair. So one of the things that we're attuned to in the second half of the book is how to build coalitions that will come together to fight for a common cause. And there are so many people who would benefit from an affirmative right to reverse engineer and modify the devices around them, whether that's people who just want to install third-party ink, or artists who want to get shut of the entertainment silos, or independent auto mechanics or iPhone repair people who want to bypass the DRM in those devices. And by pulling them all together into a coalition, we can get a lot more done then we can't just fighting as musicians or as writers about ebooks or audiobooks or DRM music. We can really build powerful coalitions that can make significant changes.
Yeah, we were really determined. We were really determined in coming up with ways that could actually widen these choke points out, that take into account the challenges that traditional kind of antitrust remedies have when they're dealing with monopolies and also monopsonies. Those remedies are things like breaking companies up, or giving, making them pinky swear that they're not going to act badly. What actually happens in practice is that it can take decades and billions of dollars to break a company up, and that weirdly enough, those pinky promises keep getting broken. And so what we did find is that there are certain kinds of interventions that do work better than others. And so anything that we can do that encourages new entrants into markets, that directly regulates this excessive buyer power, and that builds countervailing power in workers and suppliers, these are the keys. And it's just been so thrilling over the time that we've been working on this book to see how that worker power has grown. So we worked closely with the Writers Guild of America when we were writing this book. At that point, they were out on strike against the Hollywood talent agencies. They were told that they were never going to win that strike, and they were up against powerful corporations owned by private equity that really couldn't afford to let them win, and they ground it out, and they did it. And David Goodman, who was the president of the guild when that strike was ongoing, he was our interlocutor at our US book launch around this time last year, and he was there, and he said, "Look, my wife worked this out long before I did." But it turns out that we gave them a lot more power in our heads than what they actually have, because you can have Hollywood without talent agencies, but you can't have Hollywood without writers. And so, yeah, I think knowing about the kinds of power that we have and then seeing that play out in action is, I think, hopefully this is as contagious as fear can be. That hope can be as contagious as fear can be. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I really encourage folks as well to have a look at this. David also wrote a new Futurama episode that just came out this season called Momazon. He wrote that around the same time that he was at that event with us, and he said that Chokepoint explained it, or inspired the episode. So if you don't feel like you're a big reader but you want to know more about this, you could just watch Futurama instead.
No, Rebecca, don't tell him to watch TV. Tell him to read books. Another great example is actually this Disney Must Pay campaign, because what you said, I mean, some of the stuff that these companies do is so outrageous that when you bring this to the public, they are outraged, and that is sort of this groundswell. So that the Disney Must Pay, in a nutshell, Disney bought Lucas Film and Alan Dean Foster, who I actually own a lot of books by, and here's just one. The Thing, actually in German. He wrote novelizations of big movies, Star Wars movie, the first one, The Thing, Alien and Aliens, and Disney basically said that they don't have to pay him royalties for his books, and this campaign started. And as far as I know, he's now compensated, and some lower names maybe not. So this also has to do with his name is kind of a big name, but that's a great example of just shining light on some just absolutely egregious theft, basically, right?
Yeah, the one of the other proposals that we talk about in the book is actually a feature of European law. It came in through the same Digital Single Markets Directive that mandated copyright filters. It was kind of a mixed bag, and that's a right of transparency to royalty calculations. So one of the things that held up Alan Dean Foster and the other Disney writers is Disney just wouldn't explain what they were doing. They wouldn't explain why the royalties were so low, why they weren't getting the money that they thought they were owed. And then, finally they came up with this cockamamie explanation where they said, oh, well, we bought the assets from Lucasfilm, like the right to publish your book, but not the liabilities, like the obligation to pay you when we do. And, the right of transparency is something that is a very powerful tool, because it's very hard to know how to fight your adversary if you don't know what the adversary looks like. If you can drag the accounting practices out into the light of day, oftentimes conscience recoils from them. I mean, these are not particularly subtle scams. They're complicated, but they're not subtle. they basically, like, there's a thing in accounting called the Generally Accepted Accounting Practices, the GAAP guidelines. And when a company, for example, a record company, takes money out of every royalty statement because they're accounting for breakage, which is a line item that refers to the number of vinyl record albums that are broken on the truck on the way to the record store, and they take that out of your MP3s. The GAAP line item that describes that is "fuck you, that's why." And if you can make them explain that the basis for their royalty calculation is "fuck you, that's why," and you make them do it in public, policymakers, audiences, and artist groups are galvanized into action because it is materially, nakedly unfair.
We have just a few minutes left. Rebecca Giblin, Cory Doctorow guests today. Book is Chokepoint Capitalism. Really amazing book. Lays out the issues in detail, provides solutions. Another solution strategy is, of course, go local. That's how I would call it. You use one example here, Resonate, which is kind of a streaming service. You can buy downloads. Really cool business model. A startup, starting slow, starting small. Their slogan is a music platform we can all control. No, really. Co-op pricing is actually resonate.coop is the website. So really cool stuff. Let me see what I also wanted to mention that I really enjoyed, you guys mentioned actually Christoph Penderecki was one of my favorite composers. And back in college, I did a piece on Threnody, or I wrote a paper on the Threnody to the victims of Hiroshima, which is a difficult piece. Yeah, and what is really cool is that you use this Penderecki piece as an example of how the way streaming services sort of calculate royalties and how we sort of in culture or how these owners of culture, these behemoths, these monopsonies and monopolies are pushing us towards a really terrible monoculture of the same shit over and over. Using this as an example of not only a difficult piece but also a longer piece, right? A difficult long piece can, in the current model, how streaming is remunerated, is bad. You will make more money with chill vibes, I guess, right?
That's right.
With 30-second chill tunes, hundreds of them.
That's right. They want us to have unchallenging music of the kind that we can pump between our ears all day, every day, without thinking about it, and without ever feeling that we've had too much sound. And I think it's a really good time, particularly with the popularization of generative AI, to think about what kind of culture do we want to have.
Oh yeah.
Do we want human creators? Do we want local stories to be told? If we want this to happen, if we want more challenging art forms that really push the needle, then we have to pay for those, and we have to find ways to let people live with economic dignity.
You mentioned locally owned and operated. You mentioned also minimum wage in the book, a job guarantee, really cool stuff. And I would just add, like what you just said, Rebecca, what is so important, the kind of also educating the public how important it is, as we all think here, I think in this room, that culture is diverse, that everybody's at the table, that small niche creators are heard, even if you're not into the Threnody here for listening to it for breakfast or for relaxation, but somebody may be, and we want that stuff out there. And in terms of AI, maybe 30 seconds. The danger of AI is clear in terms of policy and everything, but in terms of culture, I heard Rick Beato, the famous YouTuber, God, call Rick a YouTuber, he's going to be mad, but he had an interesting thought about AI, and he said, what will prevent streaming services to basically create AIs that basically just churn out sound-alikes, right, of famous artists, and they don't have to deal with any major label, because as you also write in the book, most people, for better or for worse, I would say for worse, actually just like to have something on in the background. They really don't care and have that sort of relationship with a particular artist, like in the olden days when I was young, and there was an album, and I listened to that album a million times. They want something on, so you could create these AIs that are sound-alikes essentially, and you don't have to pay any royalties. That's a real nightmare scenario. Accelerating this. Quick comment, Cory?
Well, I do think that our bosses are insatiably horny for replacing us with substandard automation and never paying us another dime. I don't know that that the music will be any good, and I don't know that people will tolerate it. I think that there is the fact that someone in the short term finds the novelty of it passable or interesting doesn't mean that it has much staying power. I think that it is right to be worried that our bosses want to replace us with substandard automation, but I think that it's a mistake to assume that AI can replace us in a way that people will be happy with. I think our bosses just think that with monopolies, they don't have to make people happy.
Okay, awesome place to close, where Cory is less cynical than I am, which is very good. Gives me some hope. Thank you, Cory Doctorow, Rebecca, Giblin, and Philip here in the audience, and everybody in the audience. Really awesome food for thought. Please get this book. It's really important. I'm going to run through the credits here real quick. Book club, usually every first Wednesday of the month at 12 p.m. Second Life time. Sometimes we, of course, accommodate our guests, like today. So please look at the calendar. I can't guarantee that it's always at 12 p.m. The show is produced by yours truly. Camera sound by Isabel Sharon. Avatars made by Bespoke Caravan. Research by Shyla and Monkey. And the location is always second.live/book club, and then there will be a teleporter that teleports you to the specific location. The website is draxtor.com/slbookclub. And again, every first Wednesday of the month, there is, if you would like to support the show, there is a tip jar for our volunteer team. The tip jar, where's the tip jar? Shyla, please point it out. Oh yeah, here's in the back. And please throw your lindens in there. Now we have another show in November. You can look that up. But what I want to bring to your attention is an absolutely amazing show that I put together for December 27, and it is, let me get.
Hey Drax, I gotta go get my kid from school, so I'm
gonna jump off too. So good to see you all. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
12/27. Want to close with this? Is an Infinite Jest translator special. People know how obsessed I am with Infinite Jest. I tweeted, what is the metaverse? The metaverse is Infinite Jest. It's more than a book. It's an entire universe, and it's rightly regarded as one of the most important American novels of the last 30 years. And I was able to bring together the translators from Germany, from Serbia, and from Iran, and possibly the guy from Greece, Kostas, will join us as well. So we will talk about Infinite Jest, and we'll talk about literary translation. If you don't know what this book is about, come on down. It's not going to be boring. 12/27. That's the Second Life Book Club for today. Good night and goodbye.